One game, all the marbles. I'm joined by Anthony Wiggins of the Locked On Jaguars, and we will have a fun crossover to see which team will come out on top of the AFC South.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Jags fans, Texans fans, to this Thursday's episode of the Locked On Texans, Locked On Jaguars crossover show. I'm joined by, of course, Tony Wiggins, the Locked On local football analyst for the Jags. I'm John Hickman, your Locked On host for the Houston Texans. We'll be diving into the keys to victory and predictions for Sunday's matchup, the biggest storylines between the Jags and the Houston Texans, and how this battle for the AFC South, I think, is one that a lot of people did not expect, but here we are, week 11, I believe, week 11 in the NFL, and a lot of implications on the line. We got the playoffs, we got seeding, we got division. What's going to happen, man? How's it been for you guys? And by the way, remember that conversation who called this could happen this year early in the offseason and said, I think Texas could win this division.
I said that, didn't I? I didn't say y'all gonna win no division. I did say y'all weren't gonna be the cellar dwellers, though. Didn't I say that?
You did say that. That's what we can
agree. In fact, I thought I said y'all gonna be fighting out with Indy to see who's gonna be the other team. Correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. I ain't no belief.
Right.
I ain't prime. I ain't asking if you believe. I'm telling you what you said, and we got the evidence that that's what happened. No, man, but very, very interesting year. Very interesting surprise that this season, that a lot of how this season is going to go will come down to this game. My family, I got 2 daughters that live in Houston now. So it's
okay.
Yeah, they're going to the game too. And I told them, hey, you know what? Look for Cody or John if somebody's trying to bother with you. Yeah, so my thing is a very, very interesting game. It's interesting that it came down to that it's going to come down to either it's going to be a separation Sunday or everybody's going to be all tied up, and it's going to, depend on what people do from that point forward. Another interesting part of it is the quarterback situation. There are a lot of people right now. You see the dudes on social media talking about if you could start a franchise right now, who would you start? And they forgetting about Trevor Lawrence already. So a lot of the CJ Stroud is the best quarterback in the AFC stuff. We get to let all of that stuff get hashed out this weekend, and I'm looking really forward to it. We'll go through this, talk about the battle for the AFC South, look at the biggest storylines in segment 2, and then segment 3, keys to victory, and we'll make a prediction. I'm gonna tell y'all, I ain't gonna even try to lead you into it. Y'all know what I'm gonna say, but
you know what I'm gonna say.
I know what you're gonna say. The fool, I ain't worried about you. Ain't nobody worried about you.
This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm looking for right now.
I see Cody was too scared to show up again. I know he's gonna be like, I got so many jobs and I got a lot of work. No, you don't. You ain't want to deal with me. That's what it is. But
I think right now he's at the Rockets game, getting ready for the Rockets.
Okay.
But I did want to ask you about Travis Etienne.
Yeah.
The production from him started off really hot at the beginning of the year, has kind of fallen in the last couple of games. He was a player that, you really got to account for this Jags offense, one of the playmakers. But I do want to ask you about Travis Etienne. What's happening with him? Why is he not being as explosive or dynamic as he been early on in the season? And the connection that a lot of us thought would be a top 5 connection in the NFL between Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley. Why hasn't that been more consistent?
All right, so let's get to the first one. You're right. Travis Etienne did start out really, really hot, right? And because he started out really, really hot and the passing game wasn't really, really hot, folks started taking him out. And they really been focused on him. And because of that, he hasn't been as productive. But he is still a factor because they're paying him so much attention. I got to remind people, the Jaguars are not 3-7. They're 7-3. So while they haven't had a whole bunch of clean games, they're coming off the cleanest game they played all year. They're coming off of that just the other day against a bad team. Everybody worried about Tennessee right now. But the thing is
shout out to Tyler from Locked On Titans.
Shout out to Tic Tac Titans. What's going on with you? But I say the same thing to you. I ain't gonna say it behind your back. If you was right here right now, I say the same thing, and you know it. But and you know what? He probably wouldn't disagree. I'm not gonna sit here and bang on my head like my daughters do, but my head is itching. The top of my head. You see me struggling right now, John. Y'all don't do this kind of stuff on your show, but I do this kind of stuff on my show.
Every now and then we may.
I scratch my head, and because I ain't gonna edit nothing. Ross knows. Ross Jackson. Shout out to Ross Jackson for Locked On Saints. He knows that when I get to ad-libbing and scratching my head and making mistakes, that it's gonna stay in the show. So
it's probably gonna be a classic show, though.
Oh yeah, of course it is. A classic show for a classic game. But no, the other thing with Ridley is the Jaguars they haven't treated him. They're not giving him the Devontae Adams. Well, he ain't even getting the treatment now, but you know what I mean. When you got that alpha receiver, whatever you do, you're gonna throw it to him. They're not doing that, and that's because they've had other guys give them a lot of production. Trevor Lawrence drops back, and whoever's open. First, second read, they get the ball. And a lot of teams have decided that they were going to bracket Calvin Ridley, especially when the Jaguars line him up way outside like an X receiver, which he isn't. And a lot of people have teed in on him and ETN and said, okay, we're going to let other people beat us. But by the time you get through those first two options, the offensive line hadn't really held up too well, and Trevor Lawrence has been a little bit banged up. ETN has been a tad banged up. So no, hey, the sky isn't falling, but it's. I always have to remind, just like I just said, they're 7-3. They're not 3-7. So something is working, and what it is even though it's not the thing that we thought was going to be working, it's still effective because it allows other things to work. And so, but those guys are still who they are. I think Calvin Ridley's on pace to have 970 yards. I think he'll do better than that because he just had a few games where he was banged up, and then people were trying to take him away. He got back on track this week, though, so we'll see. We'll see. I think they'll both be a factor this Sunday.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I know down here in Houston, the last time the Texans played, they didn't have Derek Stingley. Jimmy Ward was out on the field, no Jalen Petrie. There was some missing pieces. So I think what I'm looking forward to right now, going into this big game, because this is a big game, for both franchises who hadn't necessarily had a lot of these moments. You guys maybe more so than the Texans, but overall, we know the Texans had a Jags number, but just big regular season games, there hadn't necessarily been a lot of moments, I think, especially when it comes down to the division. It's been so lopsided. So I'm looking at a lot of these matchups, what I can't wait to get into, just overall seeing how can Houston, which was a different team from when they played and won the first time, take advantage of some of the things that the Jacksonville Jaguars aren't necessarily good at doing, one of which is stopping the pass. And Houston's coming in red hot, one of the, if not the best passing team in the NFL for the last 5 games. So that's a matchup I'm really looking forward to, and I'm excited to see.
All right, we'll get to it. We'll talk about the biggest storylines. We'll get to all of that. And one of those storylines is, I'm going to tell you right now, the statistical thing that says we're not good at the pass, that's not true. That's because they do such a good job of stopping the run that the way the games usually flow and how things usually go. They've had a couple of games where C.J. Stroud probably had the best game all season against them, and they haven't really been that bad against the pass. But we ain't going to rush that. We'll get to that in segment number 2. We'll do it in just a second. I almost said we're going to do it here in just a second on Locked On Jaguars, but no, we're doing this on a crossover between Locked On Jaguars and Locked On Texans. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Locked On Texans and on Locked On Jaguars crossover on a Thursday.
And before we move on, guys, I can't wait to tell you about Prize Picks, which is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. You want to win some extra cash by looking at the more than, less than option in sports. You can just sit back and kind of play from your phone. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You're not playing against me. You're not playing against Wig. You're not playing against Cody. You're not playing against Trevor Lawrence. It's just you battling thousands of other players. It's you versus the numbers, not playing against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. You pick the more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. Sit back and watch the winnings roll in. You want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' most favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find the community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks also offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players get injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who leaves the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an insurance policy. You can't beat that. Go to prizepicks.com or look up the app on your phone. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for a first-time deposit match up to $100.
All right, we're going to run along here, segment 2 on Thursday crossover edition, sponsored by Prize Picks. John Hickman, Locked On Texans. Tony Wiggins, Locked On Jaguars. It's time to talk biggest storylines. And if you let me go first, I'll tell you what it is right now. It's going to be the quarterbacks. The floor is yours. It's going to be the quarterbacks. It's all about all of the narratives around this. Normally, you don't see a rookie halfway through the season be anointed the best in the league when there was already a guy in the league that's pushing to be a top 6, top 7 quarterback in the league. But that's exactly what happened. I think it's a little bit of a rush. But I will tell you this. I will preface it by saying this. I thought not taking C.J. Stroud number 1 was a mistake. And I said it then. I said he spins it. He can throw it. People that said that he was a poor man's Kirk Cousins, I said they need to get their eyes checked. That is not who he is. That's not what he is. C.J. Stroud almost single-handedly beat Georgia. And I don't use college all the time, but I will say this as a team full of NFL players. And that night, C.J. Stroud was the best player on the field. So whenever that happens, I always say to myself, if he can do it then, he can do it when they get to the league, especially when games like that, when they mirror what the NFL is. I think he's great. I think he's absolutely great. I just think because Trevor has had some games this year where he hasn't looked great. One was against Houston, Kansas City, and then again against San Francisco. Yeah. People aren't paying attention to the big picture of their offensive line. And I know Houston fans are going to be like, well, when the Jaguars played the Texans, there were 4 offensive linemen missing. You're right, there was. Jaguar fans believe, though, they had a hangover from the previous week when they lost to the Chiefs. All offseason, everything was geared to beating the Chiefs in a home opener and in week 2 because that's the team that they had lost to in the playoffs. Back then, that's what everybody thought. The irony is that the 3 games where they haven't played well and the 3 games where they have struggled have been against those base 4-3 teams: Texans, Chiefs, and the 49ers. And maybe it's something about that what Doug Peterson last year referred to as the old school 4-3 alignment. Maybe they don't work and because they don't see it very often, maybe they don't go against it. And then when they do, they have problems. And then those teams play with a high energy and give the Jaguars some trouble. So to me, the biggest storylines before I let you go is the quarterback situation. And so many narratives that's going to be painted based on who wins and who plays the best in this game.
But I also do think a big part of this storyline going into this game Sunday is teams protecting each other's their opposing their own quarterback. The Houston Texans finally have some continuity at that offensive line spot. The last couple of games, not only have they been able to do a good job of protecting CJ, which for the most part, that's been the case all year. I think even with the ups and downs and the makeshifting of the offensive line, they've done a good job of protecting CJ. They've done a better job in the last 2 games, opening up running lanes for Devin Singletary. But you guys have 5 games where the offensive line have allowed 3 or more sacks. And so for Houston, statistically, in terms of sack numbers, they don't have a lot on the year, but they're one of the best pressure teams in the NFL. And I think a lot of that has to do with what John Grenard, the 4-year man, has been able to do while being healthy, and rookie Will Anderson. The D tackles are playing much better. So I am looking at the front 4, for the Houston Texans to have a good day, to make Trevor Lawrence's life a little bit harder, get after him, get some pressure on him, get a hand in his face. And once you kind of rattle Trevor Lawrence, like cut the head of the snake, everything else kind of dies. And I still think that regardless of the up and down year Trevor Lawrence has had, he's still a quarterback you have to respect. You know, we know what he did last year in the playoffs. He's had some moments this year. If you are able to kind of rough him up and take away an element of that offense, getting pressure on him, it's going to be a rough day. And I think this is one of those games where Houston's going to be able to get after the quarterback at least 2 or 3 times.
So what has happened recently is you heard a lot of talk, Arden Key, Nick Bosa, over the last couple of weeks say about Trevor Lawrence. And it's been a lot of it has been misconstrued. And I really think Arden Key was the main one that made people start tripping, where they said the Jaguars like to get rid of the ball very quickly. They do. I'm talking about Trevor gets it in his hand and whop, it's out, right? They say you take away the early read, the quick read, you know where it's going. You make him go through his progressions, and that's where he struggles. So let me clarify. I'm not going to tell you what I think they mean, but I'm going to tell you what the truth is. Trevor Lawrence can read defenses. Trevor Lawrence is not having trouble seeing the field. The problem is you take away the first read, he goes to the second one. If that's not open, ain't enough time to go to the third one because the offensive line is making him run for his life. That's where we are. And sometimes it looks like when he doesn't have the first read, doesn't have the second one, then he gets a little jittery and you can force him to do something crazy. It's not like the Jameis Winston deal, or it's not like where he gets nervous or anything like that. Like Jameis trusts his arm too much and other guys get nervous and just panic. Trevor just wants to make a play, right? He wants to make a play. He doesn't want to get a sack to get in a long down and distance situation. And this year, for the most part, he hasn't been able to run as much because he's had a banged up knee. Therefore, it's led them to be sort of put in that little bit of a box where they don't have a catch radius receiver. They don't have Mike
Are
Evans.
Jags fans disappointed with, and I haven't had an opportunity to catch a lot of games from the Jags, but I haven't heard Evan Ingram's name as much this year. Has he still been what this offense has needed for him to be?
Sometimes
Christian Kirk, what's the situation with Christian
Kirk's fine. The biggest deal is Zay Jones has only played a couple of games. Zay Jones is, they say Calvin Ridley plays his best when Zay Jones is in the lineup. That's true.
Yeah.
That is not a lie. That's true. However, it's more coincidence than it is Zay Jones making everything go. But Zay is their only true sort of guy who can catch difficult catch radius balls. Well, they don't have that when he's not there. And he was limited this week. So people are disappointed because of the expectations, but they're not disappointed when you watch and look at a club's performance. I think Calvin probably struggled in the Texans game this year. He had some drops early in the year. He wants to redeem himself, and he wants to get out there and play better. And I think he will. I think a lot has really been overblown in that way. Another storyline is the defense.
I wanted to ask you about number 4 rushing defense. It's hard to run on y'all. What's up with that?
Yeah, it's hard to run because of who they are. A lot of that has to do with Trayvon Walker because they're actually missing their starting defensive tackle, Devon Hamilton. He was a healthy scratch last week. I don't know if they'll bring him back or not this week yet. I haven't seen the injury report, but a lot of that is just the way that they're playing up front. The Jaguars, when they're healthy on the back end, like Tyson Campbell has missed time, Andre Cisco has missed time. When they are healthy on the back end and they have everything going and everything works together, they may not get a lot of credit for getting a lot of sacks, but they do get a lot of credit for getting a lot of pressure and the down the distance situation that they put people in because folks just can't run the ball on them. So they're 7-3. I feel like every time I talk to somebody about the Jaguars, I'm trying to explain something that's not going right. The bottom line is
they're still 7-3.
They're still 7-3. So we got keys to victory and predictions coming up here. But go ahead, John.
Have you guys, and I just kind of want to have a quick conversation now because I'm talking to you now. This is me and you talking.
Yeah.
Have you guys felt slighted? Like I'm on social media all day, and it seems like the Jags are frauds. The name calling, of course, is cool banner to have on social media. It's just all fun games, but like, has it been like disrespectful to you who cover the team or just the fan base and maybe some of the players? Because nationally it's kind of like we're sitting at 7-3. We've held this division to this point. Nobody has taken over yet, but yet we're still looked at as frauds. Has that kind of been like something that's been going on is bothering some of the players or the fan base right now?
Yes and no. Can I clarify?
Absolutely.
Once we get to segment 3, good, I'll do that. We'll get to segment 3 here in just a second on the crossover edition, sponsored by Prize Picks, Locked on Jaguars, Locked on Texans. All right. Segment number 3 here, crossover edition, Locked On Jaguars, Locked On Texans. I would be remiss if I first didn't tell you about Locked On and what we've done. We've launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for your 24/7 coverage, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, right before we transition from segment 2 to segment 3, John asked me if the Jaguars feel slighted and disrespected. Yeah, they do. I don't know. The players don't. The players don't talk about that. The players say they don't care what nobody says about them. Now, I say that tongue in cheek. I think that's football talk. I think they do care, but they don't harp on it because they can control that. They control the control. And 7 out of the 10 games they've controlled it, right? So, for me though, it's a narrative that goes beyond this season. I think once you've been bad for the majority of the time, people think that you're always bad, right? And they look and try to nitpick at you. Those are the same people, by the way, the football purists that tell you you are what your record is. But they don't treat the Jags like a 7-3 team because they're nitpicking. Folks are saying that Trevor Lawrence has, by the way, the Jaguars' record over their last, I think is their last 20 games. The Jaguars are 15-5 over the last 2 years, right? The NFL is not an accidental league. You don't accidentally do this stuff like that. You might do it 1 week or maybe another week. Like Houston last year, y'all had the number 2 pick, but you went in overtime with Kansas City, right? But they weren't doing that every single week to people. So my thing is yeah, it's disrespectful, but when you really pay attention to it, it doesn't come across as disrespectful. It comes across as ignorant more than anything. And it's okay to say that a team hasn't played cleanly, hasn't played up to their potential. But it's another thing to totally say that and then ignore the fact that they're 7-3. They're 15-5 in their last 20. At some point, you got to just give them credit for who they are. Trevor Lawrence last year had 4,000 yards, completed 68% of his passes, had 26 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And people go, he's not living up to being a franchise quarterback. Are you kidding me? It was basically his rookie year because they changed everything after the first year with Urban Meyer. So it's almost as if there were some people, let me tell you what they said about C.J. Stroud. And I defended your guy. When C.J. Stroud had that game where he went for 400 yards or whatever and 5 touchdowns or whatever, they say, pipe down, the dude just had a game the other day where he threw for 140 yards. Let me explain something to you. He's a rookie. He's second in the league in yards. Ain't no need to get silly when you're trying to prove a point. It's okay to say, let's calm down a little bit, but no need to get silly when you're trying to prove a point and say, well, he had a game where he had 140 yards. Yeah, he did. And he had another one where he had 500. So what's the point? The thing is when people want to believe one side of a story, they'll do everything they can to hang on. Like the 140-yard thing is what people were hanging on with CJ, right? So with Trevor, they point to the bad games. Richard Sherman and I went back and forth. He talked about it.
Great conversation too.
Right. And it ended, amicably, but he said,
great conversation.
But the thing is he pointed out 2 games where Trevor hadn't played well. Didn't say anything. At that point, they hadn't played the 49ers, but didn't say anything about the rest of them. So it's a total package. You have to go garbage in, garbage out. You can't satisfy everybody. That's where the Jaguars are right now.
Keys to predictions from me, guys. Ironically, the Houston Texans, this will be their 5th game in a row where they've played a number 1 pick quarterback. Bryce Young, Baker, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, and now Trevor Lawrence. And in each of those games, the Houston Texans have done a very good job of getting after the quarterback. And I think that's the key to victory for Houston. You got to get after Trevor Lawrence, I think. I think if you make his day rough, if you give him some of those hits where even if the ball is released, but you're giving him an NFL allowed where you're not getting roughing the passer, which is, you don't know when you're going to get one of those flags. Give him some hits, make his job a little hard, not toughen him up, but rough him up a little bit. I think that is going to help Houston a lot in their favor. I don't think that this is going to be a blowout. I think this is going to be a very tight and intense game. that I can see going both ways. But I'm rolling with Houston right now simply because the changes that they've made, the areas of improvement that they've gotten better in over the course of this last 5-game stretch, specifically the last 2 games, I am trusting Houston to understand their opponent, know what they do well and what they don't do well, and exploit that. We've been able to see them do that. And Derek Stingley is back, played phenomenal last week. I like that matchup between he and whoever they're going to put him on over there. I got Houston 27-24.
All right, so that's a great prediction. You were very nice to say things the way that you said them, but I disagree. I think what happens is in this game, the Jaguars now, they won't take Houston for granted. They're not coming off the Chiefs loss and then thinking like, okay, we'll just go ahead and knock them off and go to 2-1 and then go out and then all hell breaks loose. That's not going to be what happens in this game. Y'all had like a fullback or something run a kickoff return back for a touchdown.
Yeah, that game was really drunk too.
So it's like for the Jaguars, it's like even though they haven't played clean all the time, what the thing that I notice is there is a floor with them that they don't ever go beyond, right? The 49ers game, even though both teams were coming off a bye and the Jaguars were ready to prove a point, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, and that's the 49ers, right? What I'm talking about is I saw Houston against Carolina. Carolina has 1 win on the year, and it was against Houston, right? See, that floor is a lot lower. I think the Jaguars, because they're 2 years into a program as opposed to being 1 year into a program, they got more pieces, more parts. They had that experience with the playoffs, and they know that
to argue that point, from what we've seen this year, just really briefly, the Jaguars absolutely have a better floor, but I think Houston has a better ceiling right now.
I don't think they have a better ceiling. I absolutely don't. The Jaguars now, Houston may have played and displayed a bigger ceiling. I don't think they have a bigger ceiling than Jacksonville. The Jaguars were on the 4-yard line going in to be within 3 points of the Chiefs in the NFC title game. They are still that team. In fact, they're a little bit better. So what happens is they have to put it on full display. The difference between the Jags this year and last year is the rabbit has the gun. You ain't going to catch nobody by surprise. They are getting everybody's best effort every single week, right? And I don't think Houston's at that point yet where I think it's starting to turn. I think people now realize Houston isn't a pushover, but I don't think Houston's getting everybody's best effort every single week like they're trying to prove something. And the Jaguars could play the Carolina Panthers 20 times on ice and they wouldn't lose to them. So that is the point that I'm making. And it's not really to poke at Houston or to poke at you guys, but what it is y'all almost there. I feel you, and it's coming. But I think the Jaguars are going to show this Sunday that you're not quite there, and I think the Jags going to win 30-20.
Is it like a second half pull away? Because Houston has.
I think it's going to be a situation where the Jaguars midway through the second quarter, they'll never be a threat to lose, even though Houston won't be blown out. I just think the Jaguars are going to be in cruise control. They're going to eliminate the mistakes. And I think Travis Etienne is going to have a big game and Calvin Ridley. Since you asked about them, they're going to have a big game.
I'm going against that, man.
You should. I ain't mad at you for going against it.
I wouldn't go against it if I didn't. Like, if I'm just going against it, like, because I'm talking to you, because we do that. But I think the talent level of Derek Stingley is going to take out Calvin Ridley. I honestly do.
Okay, I hope they guard him one-on-one then and don't bracket him because I done seen Derek Stingley get smoked. All right.
Oh, I need to see that this year.
I'm telling you right now.
See it Sunday.
If you play him one-on-one, Devontae Adams said he's a top 5 route runner. If you play Calvin Ridley one-on-one, it's going to be trouble.
Houston fans, y'all hear this?
Like Dollar Bill said.
All right.
So here we go, man. Texans Jags has been settled. John and I'll be with a postcast Sunday. If you follow Locked On Jaguars, but make sure y'all take care of each other. Me and John are going to continue this away from here. Until next time, Locked On Jaguars, Locked On Texans, make sure you join us every single day. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network.